I am quitting my job and you will support us while I get things together. That was the text my sister sent me on a Tuesday morning expecting me to comply. I replied with 3 simple words: not my responsibility. Then I picked up my pen and signed a confidential contract for a new job overseas starting Monday. Just 15 minutes later, my mother called screaming that I was a selfish spinster. And before the hour was up, the concierge of my building sent a message that made my blood run cold. My entire family was in the lobby with moving boxes. My name is Nina. I am 33 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life healing from the financial wounds my family inflicted on me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who treated you like a walking bank account. Growing up in Chicago, my family operated on a strict, unspoken hierarchy. My younger sister Brittany was the undeniable golden child. She was 30 years old now, but my parents, Patricia and Gregory, still treated her like a fragile princess who needed constant rescuing. I was the designated problem solver expected to sacrifice my own comfort to ensure Brittany never had to face the consequences of her actions. It had taken me years of relentless hard work to distance myself from that toxic dynamic. I poured my heart into my career, eventually becoming the director of global supply chain for a major luxury brand. My days were highly demanding, filled with international logistics and multi-million-dollar decisions. I had built a beautiful life for myself, including a stunning condo in downtown Chicago. I kept my family at a polite distance because every time I let them in, it cost me my peace of mind or my savings. That particular Tuesday started like any other busy morning. I was sitting at my desk overlooking the Chicago River, reviewing quarterly reports. My phone buzzed with a notification from our family group chat. The message was from Brittany, and it read, "I just quit my job. Jason and I need a break to sort things out. Mom said you can cover our mortgage and living expenses for the next 6 to 8 months. Thanks, sis." I sat there staring at the glowing screen, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her words. Brittany and her husband Jason lived well beyond their means. Jason was chronically underemployed, always bouncing between unrealistic business ventures. Brittany had a decent job, but spent her money on designer clothes and luxury vacations. And now she was casually informing me that I would be funding their extravagant lifestyle for over half a year, simply because she felt like taking a break. A familiar wave of anxiety washed over me. It was the exact anxiety I felt when we were growing up and my parents would force me to give Brittany my allowance because she had already spent hers. But I was no longer that helpless teenager. I picked up my phone and typed my response. I did not offer a compromise. I simply typed, "not my responsibility," and hit send. Right in front of me, sitting next to my keyboard, was a thick folder containing a highly confidential relocation contract. My company had offered me a massive promotion to transfer to our European headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. It came with an incredible salary, a generous housing allowance, and the opportunity of a lifetime. I had been hesitating for weeks, worrying about leaving everything familiar behind, but reading Brittany's message provided the exact clarity I needed. I picked up my silver pen, flipped to the last page of the heavy document, and signed my name. I was moving to Switzerland on Monday. Less than 2 minutes after I signed the contract, my phone began to ring loudly. It was my mother, Patricia. I knew exactly what was coming, but I decided to answer anyway. The moment I said hello, her voice blasted through the speaker, dripping with venom and outrage. "How can you be so incredibly selfish, Nina?" she screamed, her voice echoing slightly in my quiet office. "Your sister is going through a transitional period, and she needs her family. You earn a high 6-figure salary. You are going to sit there and act like you cannot help your own flesh and blood." I kept my voice perfectly level, refusing to let her see that she was affecting me. "Mom, Brittany is a 30-year-old married woman," I explained calmly. "If she and Jason want to take a break from working, they need to figure out how to fund it themselves. I am not paying their mortgage." My mother scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound that I had heard 1,000 times before. "You have always been stingy, Nina," she snapped. "Ever since you refused to give Brittany your car in high school when she needed it more than you did." You sit alone in that fancy condo acting superior while your sister actually tries to build a family. Family requires sacrifice. You will transfer the money to her account by Friday, or you will have to answer to me and your father. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion listening to her twist reality. The car she was referring to was a used sedan I had bought entirely with my own money from working double shifts at a greasy diner. I had saved for 2 years, smelling like fried food every weekend, while Brittany got her nails done and went to parties. When I finally bought the car, my parents had demanded I hand the keys over to Brittany just because she got her license. The script had not changed in 15 years, only the dollar amount had increased. "I am not transferring any money, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, absolute certainty. "I am not discussing this further. Have a good day." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number as well as my father's and Brittany's. I needed to finish my workday and finalize my relocation details with human resources. The decision to cut them off felt lighter than I had anticipated. Knowing I would be in Geneva by next week made their petty demands feel small and irrelevant. I spent the next hour feeling incredibly productive, sending emails and organizing my transition plan for the team I was leaving behind. Then the screen of my phone lit up with a text message from the front desk of my residential building. The concierge, a kind man named David, sent a message that instantly shattered my newfound peace. The text read, "Miss Nina, your parents, your sister, and her husband are currently in the lobby with several large moving boxes. They are demanding a spare key and told me you are expecting them to move in today. Should I send them up?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the words again to make sure I was not hallucinating. They had not just demanded my money. They had packed their belongings and driven to my home under the delusion that they could simply take over my space because I worked long hours. The sheer entitlement was staggering. They really believed I would just surrender my home and my life to accommodate their laziness and poor choices. I grabbed my coat and my purse, leaving my office without a word to my assistant. I rushed to the elevator, my mind racing with a million different scenarios. The battle lines were officially drawn, and I knew that whatever happened next in that lobby would change our family dynamic forever. The descent from the 42nd floor felt agonizingly slow. I watched the digital numbers above the brass elevator doors tick down, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to remain perfectly calm. Emotional reactions were exactly what my mother thrived on. She fed on panic and guilt, using them as weapons to steamroll her way into getting exactly what she wanted. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, taking one final deep breath as the heavy silver doors slid open to the ground floor. To my right stood a towering stack of cardboard boxes and mismatched pieces of bulky furniture that clearly belonged to my sister. In the center of it all, my mother, Patricia, was aggressively leaning over the mahogany reception desk, pointing a manicured finger directly at David. David was a retired police officer who had worked as our building concierge for 5 years, and he looked remarkably unbothered by her shrill screaming. My sister Brittany stood a few feet away, tapping on her smartphone with a profoundly bored expression. It was as if moving into a luxury high-rise apartment she did not own was simply a tedious chore. Her husband Jason was already barking loud, arrogant orders at two exhausted-looking men in matching moving company uniforms. I stepped out of the elevator and my heels clicked sharply against the pristine marble floor. David caught my eye first, and the relief washing over his face was immediate. He gave me a subtle, respectful nod, stepping back from the desk as I approached the unfolding disaster. My mother turned her head at the sound of my footsteps. The angry scowl on her face instantly morphed into a smug, triumphant smile that made my stomach turn. She crossed her arms, looking me up and down, as if she had already won a battle I did not even know I was fighting. "Nina, darling," she called out, her voice dripping with artificial, sugary sweetness. "It is about time you came down here. This front desk worker is being incredibly rude. He actually refused to give us the spare keys to your unit. I told him we were your family and that you were expecting us, but you know how stubborn the help can be." I kept my eyes fixed entirely on my mother. "What exactly are you doing here, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "And why did you bring moving boxes into the lobby of my building?" My mother sighed heavily, rolling her eyes. We are moving Brittany and Jason in today, obviously. Since you ignored your sister's very reasonable text message earlier this morning, I decided to step in and handle things like a supportive mother should. We all know you work 60-hour weeks, Nina. You are practically never in that beautiful condo anyway. It is completely wasted on a single woman living alone. Honestly, Nina, you could be a little more welcoming to our situation. Brittany whined, her voice carrying across the lobby. Jason and I are going through a really tough transition right now. We gave up our apartment lease because we need to save money while we figure out our next steps. Mom said it makes perfect sense for us to just take over your place for a while. You can keep the small guest room since you literally just sleep here anyway. It is the absolute least you can do to help your own sister get back on her feet. The movers bent down, adjusting their grip to lift a heavy floral sofa. That was the moment the remaining shreds of my patience permanently evaporated. I stepped directly into their path, blocking the wide hallway that led to the secure elevators. I held up my hand, making direct, unwavering eye contact with the older of the two movers. "Gentlemen," I said, projecting my voice clearly across the quiet lobby. "Put the furniture down immediately. If you take one more step toward those elevators with these boxes, I will have building security lock the doors, and I will personally press charges against your company for trespassing and attempted breaking and entering." Jason's face flushed a deep, angry red. He stepped aggressively toward me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me into backing down. "What is your major problem, Nina?" he demanded, his voice echoing loudly. "We paid these guys by the hour. Stop making a dramatic scene and let them do their job. We are moving in whether you like it or not. We are family, and we are not going to be out on the street just because you want to be a selfish, stuck-up brat." I did not back down a single inch. I stood my ground, looking Jason squarely in the eye. "You are not moving into my home, Jason. You are not bringing a single cardboard box up to my floor. You have exactly 5 minutes to get your belongings out of this lobby before I have the police remove you for disturbing the peace." "Nina!" Patricia cried out, her voice vibrating with genuine, furious rage. "How dare you speak to your brother-in-law that way? How dare you treat your own sister like a common stray dog? I raised you better than this. You have plenty of space and plenty of money. You are going to let them move in right now, and you are going to pay the bills until they are ready to stand on their own 2 feet. That is final." "There is no negotiation happening here, Mom," I replied, my tone completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "I am not discussing my personal finances with you. I am not funding Brittany's life, and nobody is crossing this lobby. Now tell the movers to pack up the truck and leave." Brittany began to cry. Not real tears, of course, but the manipulative, practiced sobs she had expertly used since childhood to get her way in any conflict. She buried her face in Jason's shoulder, wailing loudly about how cruel I was, and how she had nowhere else to go. I just watched her cry, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, detached clarity. My father Gregory walked over slowly, his heavy boots thudding against the polished floor. He placed a comforting, protective hand on Brittany's shaking shoulder before turning his stern, disappointed gaze on me. "Nina, that is quite enough," my father ordered, his voice rumbling with forced, heavy authority. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing this entire family in public. You need to drop this defensive, disrespectful attitude immediately. Your mother and I have already made the arrangements." "Arrangements," I repeated, my eyes narrowing as I stared him down. "You cannot make arrangements for a residential property you do not own, Dad. You have zero authority here." My father puffed out his chest, standing tall as a triumphant, arrogant smirk spread across his aging face. He reached deliberately into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of printed papers. He tapped the documents against his other hand, looking at me as if he had just executed a brilliant, flawless checkmate. "Actually, Nina, I do have full authority," he said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "You have been so busy prioritizing your little career that you seem to have forgotten how the real world actually works. I know you rent this condo, so your mother and I went straight to the property management company office this morning." He unfolded the crisp white papers and shoved them toward my chest. I did not take them, letting them flutter slightly in his firm grip. Since you are rarely home and clearly emotionally incapable of supporting your family in times of desperate need, we took matters into our own hands. My father continued loudly, ensuring David at the front desk could hear every single word. I signed a formal sublease agreement on your behalf. As your father, I have the legal right to manage your affairs when you are being unreasonable and hostile. We paid the subletting fee and signed all the proper documents. Brittany and Jason are legally registered as the new secondary tenants of your unit. We have a legal right to be here, and you cannot kick them out without a formal eviction notice. Now tell the concierge to hand over the keys before I call the police and have you cited for an illegal lockout. My father forcefully shoved the crisp white papers against my chest, and I raised my hands to take them. I looked down at the document. It was a standard sublease agreement printed on heavy stock paper, bearing the official logo of the property management group handling our building. At the bottom of the page was my name forged in my father's sharp handwriting. Next to it were the signatures of Brittany and Jason. I studied the document without reacting. The logo at the top was genuine, but everything beneath it looked rushed. My legal name was missing my middle initial. The unit number was correct, but the ownership section had been left blank. The signature at the bottom copied the shape of my name without matching the controlled stroke I used on official documents. Brittany and Jason had signed as occupants, while Gregory had signed a separate authorization line that did not legally exist. A red payment receipt had been stapled to the corner showing that my parents had paid a processing fee to an employee who apparently never checked the property records. The paper did not give them rights to my home. It gave me a clean written record of forgery fraud and attempted unlawful entry. A heavy silence fell over the lobby. Brittany stopped fake crying and peered over Jason's shoulder, a victorious smirk replacing her manufactured tears. My mother stood tall, looking as though she had orchestrated the greatest real estate deal of the century. They really believed they had trapped me. They genuinely thought they could forge my signature and force me to hand over my home. I slowly looked from the forged document to my father's smug face and then to my mother's triumphant expression. And then I started to laugh. It began as a small chuckle, but quickly turned into a genuine full-body laugh. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, sharp and bright. My father dropped his arms, his arrogant posture faltering. "What is so funny?" he demanded, his face reddening. "Do you think a legal contract is a joke to you?" I took a deep breath and handed the useless papers back to him. "You really should have done your research before committing forgery, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You went to the property management office. That was your first mistake." My mother frowned, stepping forward. "What are you talking about, Nina? The management company handles the leases. We paid them the fee." "No, Mom," I corrected her, letting a cold smile touch my lips. "The management company handles leases for the rental units, but they do not handle the privately owned units." My family stared at me, their expressions blank with confusion. "I do not rent this condo, Dad. I bought it 3 years ago. I own Unit 42 outright through a blind limited liability company. The property management group you spoke to this morning has zero authority over my unit because they are not my landlord. I am my own landlord. That piece of paper you forged is entirely worthless." The color completely drained from my father's face. He looked down at the papers in his hands, and then back up at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Brittany's smirk vanished, replaced by sheer panic. "What do you mean you own it?" she practically shrieked. "Mom, you said she was just renting." I did not give them another second to argue. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my security application and pressed the large red panic button connecting directly to the building's internal security team. Within seconds, the heavy doors of the security office down the hall swung open. 3 large men in dark suits stepped out and quickly made their way toward our group. David, the concierge, stepped out from behind his desk to join them. Ms. Nina, David said, his voice calm and professional. "Do you need assistance with these individuals?" "Yes, David. I replied loudly enough for my family to hear. These people are trespassing. They have forged documents attempting to claim access to my private residence and they are harassing me. I want them and their belongings removed immediately. Jason puffed up his chest, trying to look intimidating. Now wait just a minute, Jason yelled, pointing a finger at the tallest guard. We are her family. You cannot just throw us out onto the street. The lead security guard did not even blink. Sir, you need to gather your things and vacate the building right now, he said, leaving no room for debate. If you do not comply, we will physically remove you and call the Chicago police. Brittany started screaming. It was not fake crying this time, but a genuine hysterical tantrum. She stomped her foot on the marble floor, grabbing Jason's arm. You cannot do this to us, Nina, she wailed. We gave up our apartment. Where are we supposed to go? You ruined everything. The security guards did not wait for my response. Two of them moved in, taking Jason by the arms and guiding him toward the sliding glass doors leading out to the street. Brittany scrambled after him, screaming obscenities and crying wildly as the guards escorted them outside. The movers abandoned their efforts completely. They grabbed their dollies and ran out the door, leaving the boxes stacked haphazardly on the sidewalk. My father stood frozen, clutching the useless forged lease, his pride completely shattered. My mother, however, was not finished. As the remaining security guard motioned for her and my father to head toward the exit, Patricia turned to face me. Her eyes were dark with a furious, burning hatred that took my breath away. You think you have won? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You think you can treat your own flesh and blood like garbage and just walk away to your perfect little life. You are going to pay for this, Nina. I swear to you I will make you pay for doing this to your sister. She turned on her heel and marched out of the sliding doors, her head held high despite the absolute humiliation she had just experienced. My father followed closely behind her, not looking back. I stood entirely alone in the center of the lobby, the sudden silence feeling incredibly heavy. I thanked David profusely for his swift intervention and assured him I was fine, though my heart was pounding fiercely against my ribs. I told him I would speak to management later. I needed a moment to gather myself before heading back up to my office. I walked down the side hallway toward the resident mailroom, hoping a mundane task would help steady my shaking hands. The mailroom was empty and quiet, smelling faintly of fresh cardboard and floor polish. I pulled my keys from my purse and walked to my assigned lockbox. As I reached to insert the key, I stopped cold. The small metal door of my mailbox was slightly ajar. The lock mechanism had been completely forced open, the metal around it scratched and dented. I pulled the little door wide open and stared into the dark, empty space. I had not checked my mail in 3 long days, and I knew with absolute certainty I had several highly important financial statements scheduled to arrive this very week. But there was absolutely nothing inside. My stomach plummeted as a terrifying realization washed over me. Every single envelope containing my highly sensitive personal information had been taken. I stood frozen in front of the open metal box, my mind racing to put the pieces together. The confrontation in the lobby had been a massive, chaotic distraction. While my father was waving that forged lease around and Brittany was screaming her lungs out, my mother must have slipped away. She knew exactly where the resident mailroom was located. It made terrifying sense now. The entire grand spectacle of moving Brittany into my home was only one half of their plan. If they successfully bullied me into handing over the keys, they would have secured a luxury condo for their golden child. But if I refused and fought back, they still walked away with the ultimate prize: my mail, my private financial life. I closed the broken metal door, trying to control the sudden wave of nausea. I had worked tirelessly to untangle my finances from my parents when I started my career, but the sheer violation of my mother prying open my mailbox felt like a physical blow. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. I was a global supply chain director. I handled logistical disasters involving millions of dollars across multiple continents on a weekly basis. I could handle Patricia. I turned away from the mailboxes and began walking briskly toward the elevator bank. Just as I reached out to press the call button, My cell phone vibrated violently in my hand. The screen lit up with a high-priority fraud alert from my primary banking institution. The automated text message requested immediate verification for a pending wire transfer. The amount requested was exactly $50,000. I stared at the glowing numbers on my screen. $50,000. It was a highly specific amount, and it was being drawn from an account I had completely forgotten about. It was a childhood joint savings account that my grandparents had set up for me when I was 10 years old. My mother had been listed as the primary custodial signer on the account because I was a minor at the time. I had transferred my own deposits to a private wealth management firm years ago, but I had left a decent sum of money sitting in that old account, simply because I had forgotten it existed. My mother still had her name on it. The pieces of her plan clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Even with her name on the old account, she could not authorize a massive wire transfer without verifying my modern account numbers and the specific security questions the bank had updated last year. That was exactly why she needed my physical mail. She needed my monthly paper statements to answer the security verification questions and bypass the complex two-factor authentication protocols. She had stolen my mail, walked out of my building, and immediately called the bank, pretending to act on my behalf to drain $50,000 in liquid cash. I did not waste a single second. I immediately tapped the phone number for my personal wealth manager. His name was Richard, and he answered on the second ring with his usual calm, professional tone. "Richard, I have an extreme financial emergency," I said, walking onto the empty elevator and pressing the glowing button for my floor. "My mother has stolen my physical mail and intercepted my bank statements. She is currently attempting to wire $50,000 out of my legacy joint savings account. I need you to freeze everything associated with my social security number right now." Richard did not ask for unnecessary explanations. He immediately went to work typing rapidly on his keyboard. "I am locking your primary portfolios now, Nina," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I see the pending wire request on the legacy account. It is currently in a holding status because the high dollar amount triggered our internal security review. I am declining the transfer immediately. The funds are secure. Cancel the wire entirely." I instructed, pacing the small space of the elevator car. "Then I need you to completely close that joint account. Remove every single dollar and transfer the entire balance into my secure offshore holding account. The specific one we just established last week for my corporate relocation to Geneva. I want that money entirely out of the United States banking system before the end of the business day." "Consider it done," Richard replied without hesitation. "I am also placing a hard lock on your credit profile with all 3 major bureaus. Nobody will be able to open a credit card, take out a loan, or verify a new address in your name without speaking directly to me." "Thank you, Richard," I said, feeling the tight, heavy knot in my chest finally begin to loosen. "Please flag my mother Patricia and my father Gregory as unauthorized individuals on all my files. They are actively attempting to commit wire fraud and identity theft, and I will not allow them to succeed." Richard promised to monitor my accounts personally through the weekend and strongly advised me to file a police report regarding the stolen mail. I thanked him sincerely and ended the call just as the elevator doors opened on my floor. I stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway and walked toward my unit. My hands were finally completely steady. I had caught the transfer just in time. The money was completely safe, and my mother had failed. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the peaceful sanctuary of my home. The bright afternoon sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm golden light across my polished hardwood floors. I locked the heavy deadbolt behind me and tossed my purse onto the smooth marble kitchen island. I desperately needed to pour myself a tall glass of cold water and sit down to process the sheer audacity of what they had just attempted. Before I could even reach for a glass, my phone chimed loudly in my hand, breaking the comfortable silence of my apartment. I looked down at the bright screen. I had blocked my mother from calling me earlier, but the message was coming through an unknown random number. I opened the text message, knowing instantly exactly who had sent it. The message was a frantic, furious wall of threatening text. How dare you block that transfer? You ungrateful, vicious little girl. Brittany needs that $50,000 today, and you know she does. You have millions of dollars sitting around doing absolutely nothing. That money belongs to this family, and you have no right to keep it from us. You are going to call the bank right now and authorize that wire, or I promise you, I will make your life a living hell. You cannot hide from us, Nina. I stood alone in my quiet kitchen reading the threatening message twice to make sure I fully understood it. My mother was so entirely blinded by her own rage and toxic entitlement that she did not even realize what she had just done. In her furious haste to demand the money, she had explicitly confessed to attempting the unauthorized wire transfer. She had officially documented her own financial crime in writing. I took a screenshot of the message and saved it to a secure folder. I did not reply. I blocked the number. My family thought they were playing a game they could win, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I walked away from the kitchen counter and moved to the expansive wall of windows. I stared out at the fading afternoon light stretching across the Chicago skyline, but my mind was focused inward. The lobby encounter had been utterly exhausting and infuriating. Playing defense was a losing strategy when dealing with people who had no moral compass. It was time to go on the offensive. I needed to understand the mechanics of their sudden aggressive desperation. Nothing about their behavior today felt like their usual brand of casual, entitled laziness. This was chaotic and sloppy and highly specific. I pulled out a leather-bound notepad. I wrote down the number 50,000. I stared at the ink. $50,000 in liquid cash was not the kind of money someone needed simply because they wanted to take a break from working. It was a frantic, desperate scramble for immediate, untraceable cash. That was a targeted number. Abandoning a perfectly good apartment lease overnight to force their way into my condo indicated a massive financial collapse. Brittany and Jason would never voluntarily give up their own place unless they were completely out of options. They were running from something. I sat down and opened my laptop. Brittany had worked as a senior accounts payable manager at a commercial real estate firm. It was a role that gave her direct access to vendor payments and corporate accounts. A sudden, chilling suspicion began to take root in my mind. I needed solid, undeniable facts to protect my upcoming departure. I opened my professional networking profile and searched for her company. I scrolled through the list of current employees looking for anyone I might have crossed paths with during my 10 years in corporate supply chain logistics. My eyes landed on a familiar face, Kevin. We had worked together on a massive corporate merger 5 years ago. Kevin was a sharp, meticulous auditor who had recently taken a position as the compliance director at Brittany's firm. If anyone knew what was happening behind closed doors, it would be him. I dialed Kevin's direct office line. He answered on the third ring. Kevin, it is Nina. I hope I am not catching you at a terrible time. Nina, it is great to hear from you. Are you still running the global supply chain over at your firm? Actually, I am transitioning to a new role in Geneva next week, but I am calling because I have a delicate situation and I was hoping I could ask for a professional favor. It concerns my sister Brittany. The line went completely dead silent. The warm, friendly atmosphere evaporated in a split second. Kevin, I prompted gently. Are you still there? I heard him let out a long, heavy sigh. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped to a cautious whisper. Nina, I cannot discuss internal personnel matters with anyone outside the company. The legal department has everyone on a strict gag order. My heart hammered against my ribs. A strict gag order meant the company was managing a major crisis. Kevin. I am not calling as a concerned family member. I am calling because my parents and sister just attempted to move into my home without my permission. They intercepted my private mail and attempted to fraudulently wire $50,000 out of my bank account. They are desperate. I need to know what kind of mess they are trying to drag me into before I leave the country. Wire fraud. Nina, that is incredibly serious. I know. I have locked down my accounts and I am safe. Did Brittany actually quit her job today? Another long, heavy pause followed. Finally, he spoke. She did not quit, Nina. She was escorted out of the building by corporate security on Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday. 2 days ago. What happened, Kevin? Please. I need to know what I am protecting myself from. This cannot leave this conversation, he warned. You have my absolute word, I promised. We caught her on Tuesday during a routine quarterly audit. Brittany has been manipulating the accounts payable system for 8 months. She set up 3 fake vendor accounts under dummy limited liability companies. She was approving massive invoices for consulting services that were never rendered and routing the payments directly into external bank accounts controlled by Jason. She was embezzling, I stated flatly. Yes, Kevin confirmed. She tried to push through a payment that flagged our internal compliance software. When we pulled the historical data, we found the entire trail. She and Jason have stolen approximately $150,000 since last fall. $150,000. The number rang in my ears. How did they not arrest her on the spot, I asked. Our chief executive officer knows your parents socially. He did not want a massive public scandal. When we confronted Brittany on Wednesday, she confessed to everything. She claimed they were drowning in debt and promised she could get the money back. The chief executive officer gave her a grace period. He told her if she could return an initial good faith payment of $50,000 by close of business today and agree to a strict repayment plan, he would handle it quietly. If she fails to produce the $50,000 by 5 o'clock today, we are turning the entire file over to the federal authorities on Monday morning. For several seconds, I could not speak. The events of the day rearranged themselves into a pattern that was far more deliberate than ordinary entitlement. The moving boxes were not proof that Brittany needed temporary shelter. They were part of an attempt to seize my home before I discovered why she had actually lost her job. The stolen mail and the forged lease were not impulsive mistakes either. They showed that my parents had prepared more than one route to my assets and expected at least one of them to work. What unsettled me most was not the amount of money. It was the ease with which they had decided that my security reputation and future were acceptable collateral. Kevin had given me more than an explanation. He had given me the motive connecting every action they had taken since morning. Once I understood that motive, the guilt they depended on lost its power. I was no longer dealing with a family disagreement. I was documenting a coordinated financial attack. Thank you, Kevin, I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the absolute rage boiling in my veins. You have no idea how much this helps me. I will never mention this conversation to anyone. Be careful, Nina, he said, his tone filled with genuine concern. Desperate people do terrible things when they are backed into a corner. And your sister is completely out of time. I ended the call and set my phone down. I looked around my quiet, beautiful condo. I thought about the years of therapy I had gone through to stop feeling like I was never good enough for them. The truth was entirely liberating. They were not just toxic or emotionally stunted. They were fundamentally corrupt people who were willing to commit fraud and identity theft to protect a criminal. The $50,000 wire transfer had failed. It was already past 5 o'clock on a Friday. The corporate deadline had officially passed. Brittany had failed to produce the stolen money. Come Monday morning, her former employer would hand the evidence over to the federal authorities. I stared at my packed suitcases waiting by the front door. They thought they could anchor me here and bleed me dry to save her. They were profoundly mistaken. I walked over to my refrigerator and poured myself a tall glass of cold filtered water. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. A cold, calculated determination settled deep into my bones. I was no longer playing defense. If they wanted to play games with my life, they were about to find out exactly what happens when you corner someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I paced my living room, formulating a plan. I needed to hire a defense attorney before the weekend was over. I was mentally drafting an email to my wealth manager, Richard, when my cell phone vibrated against the marble countertop. I assumed it was another frantic message from my mother. I glanced at the caller identification. It was not my family. It was the direct office line for David Miller, the vice president of human resources at my company. It was well past normal business hours on a Friday evening. A call from human resources at this hour never meant anything good. I cleared my throat and answered the phone, keeping my voice perfectly professional. "Hello, David, this is Nina." "Nina, I need you to come back to the corporate office immediately." David said, his voice incredibly stiff. "Our chief executive officer is here with me, and we need you in the primary conference room as soon as you can get here." I glanced at the clock. It was almost 7. "David, I just left the office," I replied, my mind racing. "Is there an emergency with the European transition?" "This has nothing to do with Geneva," David said, his tone dropping even lower. "This is a severe internal compliance issue. We have received a formal whistleblower complaint against you. You need to get down here right now, Nina. We are holding the building open for you." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I did not ask any further questions. I told him I would be there in 20 minutes and hung up. I grabbed my car keys and walked out, my thoughts spiraling. A formal ethics complaint made absolutely no sense. I had spent 10 years building a flawless professional reputation. I ran my global supply chain division with absolute transparency and had just been awarded a massive promotion. Someone was deliberately trying to sabotage my career. The drive to corporate headquarters took exactly 15 minutes, but felt like an eternity. The towering glass building was mostly empty, the lobby quiet and shadowed. I swiped my security badge and took the executive elevator up to the top floor. When I walked into the glass-walled conference room, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. David sat at the mahogany table with a thick manila folder. Next to him sat Marcus, the chief executive officer of our North American division, looking deeply troubled. "Please sit down," Nina Marcus said, gesturing to the empty leather chair across from them. I took a seat, keeping my posture straight, and my hands folded neatly in my lap. "I am here, Marcus," I said calmly. "Please tell me exactly what is going on." David opened the manila folder and slid a stack of printed papers toward me. "About an hour ago, our corporate compliance hotline received a detailed anonymous ethics complaint regarding your vendor management practices," David explained. "The complaint alleges that you have been actively accepting illicit financial kickbacks from our overseas textile suppliers." I stared at the men sitting across from me, completely stunned. "Kickbacks?" I repeated the word, feeling foreign in my mouth. "That is an absurd accusation. I negotiate every single vendor contract alongside the corporate legal team. There is no mechanism for me to accept kickbacks even if I wanted to." The anonymous whistleblower provided documented evidence. Marcus said, his expression grim. "The complaint includes attachments of offshore wire transfers routing thousands of dollars from our primary Asian suppliers directly into a private holding account linked to your name. They also claim you expedited the Geneva transfer to escape an impending federal audit." I reached out and pulled the printed documents towards me. The top pages were copies of emails supposedly sent from my secure corporate account to a textile manufacturer in Vietnam. Attached to those emails were doctored financial ledgers showing payments routed to a generic offshore account. The framing was devastatingly thorough, designed to look exactly like a sophisticated corporate bribery scheme. "If these allegations hold any weight, we will have no choice but to terminate your employment immediately with cause," Marcus continued heavily. "We would also be legally obligated to cancel your relocation contract to Geneva and report the financial discrepancies to the authorities. You would be facing immediate termination and potential criminal charges." I sat frozen, staring at the printed emails. My mind was moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Who would have the motive to frame me for international wire fraud? Who would want to completely destroy my career and trap me in the United States right before my relocation? And then the terrifying realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. This was not a disgruntled coworker or an angry vendor. This was my family. Brittany and Patricia had just spent the entire afternoon desperately trying to steal $50,000 from me to cover Brittany's own corporate embezzlement. When I blocked the bank transfer and humiliated them in the lobby, they realized they could not simply take my money by force. They needed a new strategy. They needed to destroy my leverage and cut off my escape route. The sheer malicious brilliance of their plan made me feel physically sick. If I was fired for cause, my lucrative relocation to Switzerland would be instantly canceled. I would lose my executive salary and my pristine professional reputation. But more importantly, I would be completely trapped in Chicago. I would be grounded, isolated, and vulnerable. But it went even deeper. I knew corporate policy inside and out. If an executive was terminated during a compliance investigation, the company often offered a quiet severance package to avoid a massive public scandal, provided the executive signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. Brittany and Patricia did not just want to trap me. They were trying to force my company to fire me so they could extort my corporate severance package. They were trying to manufacture a sudden payout to cover the stolen money Brittany desperately needed by Monday morning. They had taken the exact mechanics of Brittany's embezzlement crisis and projected them onto me. They were using her knowledge of accounts payable and wire transfers to fabricate a convincing illusion of my guilt. They wanted me broken, unemployed, and desperate enough to hand over whatever cash I had left. Nina David said gently, breaking the heavy silence in the conference room. We know this is a massive shock. We want to hear your side of the story, but you have to understand how damaging this evidence looks. The timing of your transfer to Geneva makes the offshore accounts look incredibly suspicious. I looked up from the papers and met my chief executive officer's eyes. I did not cry. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or act like a cornered victim. Instead, I felt a profound, icy calm wash over my entire body. My family had just crossed a line from which there was absolutely no return. They had tried to steal my home and my savings, and now they were trying to annihilate my career and my freedom. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. Marcus, I said, my voice projecting absolute unwavering confidence. I am going to prove to you right now that every single document in this folder is a complete fabrication. I am going to show you exactly who sent these emails and exactly why they are trying to destroy my life. David and Marcus stared at me in stunned silence. Instead of panicking, I simply reached across the polished mahogany table and pulled the thick manila folder closer to me. I took my time spreading the printed emails out in front of me, aligning the edges perfectly. I looked down at the first printed email, allegedly sent from my corporate account to a textile manufacturing executive in Vietnam. I read the opening paragraph slowly, letting a small, tight smile touch the corners of my mouth. Take a close look at the second paragraph of this first email, Marcus, I said, sliding the paper back across the table toward him. Look specifically at the way the author refers to the international shipping logistics. The email states that the overseas freight manifests need to be routed through a third-party escrow holding company to avoid regional tariff detection. Marcus frowned, looking down at the paper. He read the sentence and then looked back up at me, his expression entirely confused. Yes, he said slowly. That is exactly what the whistleblower highlighted as the mechanism for the illegal kickbacks. Any director of global supply chain working at my level would never use the phrase overseas freight manifest, I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. In modern luxury retail logistics, we exclusively use the term commercial bill of lading for international maritime transport. Furthermore, the email mentions avoiding regional tariff detection. We do not pay regional tariffs on Vietnamese textiles because our company operates under a bilateral free trade agreement. Anyone who actually works in my department would know that basic foundational fact. David leaned forward, his brow furrowed as he processed my words. So you are saying whoever wrote this does not actually understand corporate logistics, he asked. Exactly, David, I said. They used industry buzzwords they probably found through a quick internet search. Look at the syntax and the grammar. I pointed to the third printed email in the stack. This particular message was supposed to be a hostile demand for a delayed payment. Notice the spacing and the capitalization I instructed. Whoever typed this email puts 2 spaces after every single period. That is a very specific typing habit, usually drilled into people who learned to type on typewriters decades ago. But more importantly, look at how they emphasize their anger. They capitalize random nouns in the middle of the sentence to show authority. Look at this line right here. It says, I expect the payment to be processed immediately, or the contract will be terminated. Payment and contract are both capitalized for absolutely no grammatical reason. Marcus leaned in closer, adjusting his glasses as he studied the paper. He nodded slowly, realizing I was entirely correct. That is a very bizarre typographical quirk, he admitted. But Nina, anyone could have strange typing habits. This does not prove that the emails are fabricated. It proves they were not written by me, Marcus, I countered, maintaining my steady, unbothered gaze across the length of the wide conference table. You have read hundreds of my professional emails over the past 10 long years. Have you ever once seen me randomly capitalize arbitrary words or awkwardly use double spaces in my daily correspondence? He had to admit he had not. But I was not finished. The real evidence was sitting right inside my purse. I reached down and retrieved my personal cell phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my text messages. I navigated directly to the blocked folder and pulled up the frantic, furious messages my mother had sent me just a few hours ago after I had successfully thwarted her desperate attempt to steal $50,000 directly from my legacy bank account. I want to show you both something, I said, placing the phone flat on the table and sliding it over to Marcus. Please read that message carefully. It is from my mother, Patricia. She sent it to me this afternoon. Marcus looked down at the bright screen. David leaned over his shoulder to read along. The conference room was completely silent as they absorbed the vitriolic, threatening wall of text my mother had unleashed upon me. Now look at the grammar, I prompted, my voice quiet but commanding. Notice how she puts 2 spaces after every single period. And more importantly, look at the 5th sentence. She writes, you have millions of dollars sitting around doing absolutely nothing. That money belongs to this family. Millions, money, and family are all randomly capitalized for emphasis. It is the exact same distinct grammatical fingerprint as your anonymous whistleblower. Marcus looked up from my phone, his eyes very wide with a sudden dawning realization. Nina, he said, his voice barely more than a terrified whisper. Are you suggesting your own mother fabricated a complex international bribery scheme to get you fired? She did not do it alone, I clarified, taking my phone back and slipping it into my purse. My sister Brittany helped her. Brittany used to work as a senior accounts payable manager for a commercial real estate firm. That is why the emails used terminology related to escrow holding companies and vendor invoices. She took the framework of commercial real estate accounting and tried to awkwardly apply it to international supply chain logistics. They manufactured this entire crisis together. David rubbed his temples, looking deeply distressed. But why Nina? Why would your own family go to such extreme lengths to completely annihilate your career and sabotage your relocation to Geneva? I folded my hands on the table, leaning in slightly to ensure they heard every single word of the ugly truth. Because they are completely out of time and they are completely out of money, I explained, my voice devoid of any sympathy. My sister Brittany was fired from her accounts payable job on Wednesday afternoon. She was escorted out of the building by corporate security because she was caught embezzling $150,000 from her employer. Both Marcus and David let out loud, audible gasps of genuine shock. The professional composure they had maintained all evening was completely shattered. Her former chief executive officer knows my parents socially. I continued laying out the facts with surgical precision. He gave my family a grace period. He told them that if Brittany could produce an initial good faith repayment of $50,000 by close of business today, he would handle the matter internally. If she failed to produce the funds by 5 o'clock this evening, they would hand the entire investigation over to federal authorities on Monday morning. My family does not have $50,000, Marcus, I said. But I do. This morning they attempted to physically force their way into my condominium to live rent-free. When I called building security and had them removed, my mother broke into my physical mailbox. She stole my financial statements and attempted to fraudulently wire $50,000 out of a childhood joint savings account. I caught the transfer, flagged it as fraud, and moved my assets into a secure offshore holding account linked to my Geneva relocation. I completely cut off their access to my money. The silence in the room was absolute. The horrifying reality of my family's desperate scheme was finally laid bare in the bright fluorescent light of the corporate conference room. When they finally realized they could not steal my money directly, they panicked. I concluded, my voice steady and completely unwavering. They knew I was transferring to Switzerland on Monday. They knew I was slipping out of their grasp forever. They filed this ethics complaint to force you to terminate me. If I am fired for cause, my Geneva contract is cancelled. I am grounded in Chicago. But more importantly, they were banking on the fact that the company would offer me a quiet, lucrative severance package to leave without a public scandal. They tried to destroy my life so they could extort my severance money to keep my sister out of a federal prison. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, running a hand down his face as he absorbed the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I had just outlined. The silence in the room was heavy. David shifted in his seat, looking between the printed text messages on my phone and the forged corporate emails on the table. "Nina, this is a horrifying situation," David said, his voice laced with genuine sympathy. "If what you are saying is true, your family has crossed a line into severe criminal conspiracy. But you have to understand my position. We are looking at a highly sophisticated digital forgery designed to look like corporate bribery. While your mother's texting habits align with the syntax of the whistleblower complaint, a grammatical quirk is technically circumstantial. If I am going to formally dismiss an ethics complaint and clear your transfer to Switzerland, I need something absolute. I need documented proof that your mother is capable of committing this specific type of financial fraud against you." I had anticipated this exact hesitation. I knew that in the corporate world, empathy was secondary to liability. I simply nodded. "You are right, David," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor. "It is an enormous leap to assume a mother would attempt to destroy her daughter's career to orchestrate a fraudulent payout. If I were sitting in your chair, I would need concrete legal proof of a historical pattern of behavior. Fortunately for all of us, I came prepared." I reached down into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick plastic sleeve containing my sensitive personal documents. I unclasped the envelope and pulled out a faded, stapled packet of official paperwork. The blue ink stamp of the Chicago Police Department was clearly visible on the top right corner. I slid the packet across the polished wood directly toward David. Marcus leaned over to look. "This is an official police report and a court injunction that I filed when I was a sophomore in college." I explained, my voice dropping to a quiet but unwavering tone. "While I was taking a full course load and working 2 jobs to pay for my tuition, my mother, Patricia, committed severe identity theft against me. Brittany had just graduated high school and demanded a brand new car. My parents did not have the cash to buy her one, so my mother applied for a massive auto loan and several credit cards using my social security number." David flipped to the second page of the police report, scanning the detailed narrative. "When the initial applications were flagged, my mother went a step further," I continued. "She stole my physical checkbook from my dorm room during a family visit. She forged my signature on a series of bad checks to cover the down payment for my sister's luxury vehicle. She intentionally overdrew my accounts and destroyed my credit score before I was even old enough to legally rent an apartment." Marcus looked up from the police report, his expression morphing into absolute disgust. "She bought a car for your sister using forged checks in your name?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "Yes, Marcus," I replied. "When the collection agencies started calling me at my dorm, I confronted my parents. They told me I was being selfish for making a fuss. They demanded that I absorb the financial ruin to protect the family." I watched David slowly turn to the final page of the report. "I refuse to be their sacrificial lamb," I stated firmly. I walked straight into the police precinct and filed a full report for identity theft and check fraud against my mother. I forced the bank to conduct a signature verification analysis, which conclusively proved Patricia forged my name. I had to threaten my parents with a criminal trial to force them to liquidate their retirement savings, to pay off the fraudulent auto loan and clear my name. The document you are holding is the irrefutable legal proof that my mother has a documented historical pattern of committing financial fraud and forgery specifically against me to bail out my sister. The conference room fell silent once again. The police report was the absolute final nail in the coffin. It transformed my defense from a compelling emotional theory into an undeniable documented fact. My mother was a proven financial predator, and Brittany was her perpetual beneficiary. Marcus closed the folder containing the forged whistleblower emails and pushed it away with a look of profound revulsion. He took a deep breath and looked me directly in the eye. "Nina, I am profoundly sorry that you have had to endure this level of betrayal from your family," Marcus said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "Nobody should ever have to fight this hard just to protect the life they have earned. You have handled this nightmare with more grace and professionalism than I could have ever imagined." He turned his attention to David, who was already nodding in agreement. "David, I want this ethics complaint officially dismissed immediately," Marcus ordered. "Expunge it from her permanent personnel file. Nina is completely cleared of all allegations. Her promotion stands, and her corporate relocation to Geneva will proceed on Monday morning exactly as planned." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, feeling a massive weight physically lift off my shoulders. "I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your trust and swift action." David closed the police report and respectfully handed it back to me. "You do not need to thank us, Nina," he said. "You proved your own innocence. However, we do have a secondary issue that we need to address before you get on that plane to Switzerland." I carefully placed the police report back into its plastic sleeve and returned it to my tote bag. "What is the secondary issue?" I asked. "While you are cleared of these ridiculous allegations, the company itself cannot simply ignore what has happened here tonight." David explained, his tone shifting back to a serious legal framework. "Your family did not just attack you, Nina. They submitted fabricated international financial ledgers and spoofed corporate emails to our internal compliance network. They attempted to manipulate a massive multinational corporation into terminating an executive. That is a direct malicious attack on our corporate infrastructure and our operational integrity." Marcus nodded, leaning forward. "David is entirely correct. We cannot allow external actors to weaponize our compliance systems to carry out personal extortion schemes. If we let this slide without a forceful response, it sets a dangerous precedent. Our corporate legal team is going to insist on pursuing the origin of these forged emails." I understood what they were saying. My family dragged a billion-dollar brand into their criminal scheme. "I am prepared to cooperate with the legal team," I assured them. "I want to hold them accountable just as much as you do." David opened his laptop. "I am going to authorize our internal information technology department to begin a full forensic trace on the whistleblower emails right now. We need to find the exact digital origin point." They thought they were being clever by using a secure encrypted portal, but amateur fraudsters always leave a digital footprint. "We are going to find out exactly where these emails came from, and then we are going to completely bury them." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. My family had finally pushed too far, and now they would face the absolute consequences. I walked out of the corporate headquarters and stepped into the cool Chicago night air, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The defensive maneuvering was officially over. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and pulled up the contact information for an attorney I had worked with during a particularly vicious vendor dispute a few years ago. His name was Davis, and he was a notoriously ruthless corporate litigator. He handled complex, brutal financial warfare, and he always played to win every single time. I called his emergency line. Davis answered with his signature brusque efficiency. I briefly outlined the forged sublease, the attempted bank wire, and the fabricated ethics complaint. I told him my company was conducting a digital forensic trace on the emails, and I needed immediate aggressive legal representation to protect my international relocation. Davis agreed to take the case, telling me to come to his downtown office first thing Saturday morning. I drove back to my condo and managed to get a few hours of peaceful sleep. When my alarm went off on Saturday morning, I made a cup of strong black coffee and mentally prepared for the day. Just as I was putting on my coat, my phone rang. It was David from Human Resources. Nina, we found it, David said, his voice vibrating with a mixture of professional triumph and personal disgust. Our internal information technology department worked through the night analyzing the metadata from the whistleblower portal. What did they find? David asked, gripping my coffee mug. They traced the origin of the encrypted emails, he explained. The portal logs the originating hardware media access control address before the encryption layer fully engages. The emails were sent from an internet provider protocol address matching a router registered under the name Jason Miller. Jason. I repeated the name, letting the reality settle in. Brittany had used her husband's laptop at their own apartment before they packed up those moving boxes. They had launched the corporate attack from their living room, thinking they were untraceable. Yes, David confirmed. And because Jason used his personal device connected to his own home network to access our corporate portal, we have an irrefutable digital fingerprint. Our legal team is formally referring the matter to local authorities as attempted corporate extortion. We are stepping back from public action until you are safely in Switzerland. Thank you, David, I said. This is exactly the proof my litigator needs. I drove straight to Davis's office armed with the new information. The firm was quiet on a Saturday, but Davis was waiting for me in his glass-walled conference room. I handed him the police report from my college years, the screenshots of my mother's threatening text messages, and the forensic confirmation regarding Jason's internet address. Davis reviewed the documents with a sharp, predatory focus. He immediately understood the assignment. They are trying to trap you in a manufactured crisis to extort a massive financial settlement, Davis said, tapping his expensive silver pen firmly against the polished wooden table. We are going to hit them with a legal strike so severe it completely paralyzes them. I am going to remind them they are dealing with a corporate entity who has infinite resources and absolutely zero hesitation. Davis began drafting a comprehensive cease and desist order right then and there. It was a brutal, heavily detailed legal threat designed to invoke absolute terror. The document explicitly outlined their coordinated attempts at identity theft, wire fraud, and corporate sabotage. It stated in no uncertain terms that if Patricia Gregory Brittany or Jason made any further attempt to contact me, my employer, or my banking institutions, we would instantly file a massive civil lawsuit for defamation and extortion. We would sue them into oblivion. Furthermore, the order made it explicitly clear that we would hand our entire evidence file over to the federal investigators already looking into Brittany's embezzlement, guaranteeing prison time for all of them. Make sure the language is completely devoid of any familial sentiment, I instructed. I want them to understand that this is a sterile financial transaction to me now. They are nothing more than hostile liabilities to be managed and neutralized. Davis smiled a thin, grim expression. Trust me, Nina. When they read this, they will realize they have stepped on a landmine. By exactly noon, the cease and desist order was finalized, printed on watermarked legal paper, and sealed in a stark white envelope. He hired a private process server to hand-deliver the document directly to my parents' house in the suburbs. We knew Brittany and Jason were likely hovering there since I had thwarted their attempt to move into my condo the day before. The process server was instructed to physically hand the envelope to my mother and secure a photographic confirmation of the delivery. I left Davis's office and returned to my apartment. I had roughly 48 short hours left before my flight to Geneva. The heavy lifting was officially done. My wealth was safely secured in offshore accounts beyond their greedy reach. My professional reputation was entirely cleared and protected by the highest levels of my corporate leadership. My family was about to receive a legal warning so terrifying it would hopefully freeze them in their tracks. All that was left to do was pack. The physical act of packing my life into 3 large suitcases felt incredibly therapeutic. I folded my designer blazers, organized my shoes, and carefully wrapped my favorite pieces of jewelry. I moved methodically through the quiet, sunlit condo, discarding anything that felt heavy or tied to bad memories. I was not just moving across the world. I was shedding an entire lifetime of toxic obligations and unearned guilt. I was leaving behind the role of the sacrificial lamb. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a secure message from Davis. He attached a clear photograph of my mother standing on her front porch holding the thick white envelope containing the cease and desist order. Her face in the photograph was a picture of sheer shock and outrage. She looked small and suddenly very old standing there in her expensive suburban doorway, realizing her golden child was out of lifelines. I stared at the image for a long moment, expecting to feel a pang of sadness, but I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I simply deleted the photo and turned my phone on silent. As the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, painting the city in vibrant shades of orange and purple, I zipped my final suitcase closed. The condo was pristine and empty, echoing with the promise of a fresh start. My flights were booked for Sunday afternoon. I had a first-class ticket waiting for me and a beautiful corporate apartment ready in the heart of Switzerland. I ordered takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant, poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, and sat on my balcony to enjoy my final evening in the city. The cool breeze swept off Lake Michigan, carrying the scent of rain and possibility. The deep silence in my home was absolutely golden. No screaming phone calls demanding I fix an impossible situation. No manipulative text messages trying to drain my bank accounts. No sudden manufactured emergencies designed to keep me trapped in their dysfunctional web. Just the steady, comforting hum of the city below, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that I was finally taking permanent control of my own destiny. I woke up on Sunday morning feeling completely refreshed and energized. The sun was shining brightly over Lake Michigan, casting a warm glow through the bare windows of my living room. Today was the day I was supposed to board a first-class flight to Geneva and leave my toxic family behind forever. I spent the first few hours of the morning drinking coffee and doing a final sweep of the empty condo. My 3 large suitcases sat neatly by the front door, ready to be loaded into the private car my company had arranged for my airport transfer. I was just washing my coffee mug in the sink when the heavy brass knocker on my front door sounded. It was a sharp, authoritative knock that echoed loudly in the empty space. I frowned, looking at the digital clock on the microwave. It was barely 10 o'clock in the morning. My private car was not scheduled to arrive for another 3 hours. I walked over to the door and looked through the security peephole. A tall man in a plain gray suit was standing in the hallway holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look like a building employee or a driver. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a few inches, keeping my hand firmly on the handle. "Are you Nina?" the man asked, looking down at a clipboard in his hand. "Yes, I am Nina," I replied cautiously. The man thrust the thick manila envelope into my hands with practiced speed. "You have been served," he said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Have a good day." He turned around and walked briskly down the carpeted hallway toward the elevators, before I could even process what had just happened. I stood in the doorway, staring down at the heavy envelope in my hands. A cold prickle of dread began to creep up the back of my neck. I closed and locked the door, walking back into the empty kitchen. I tore open the seal and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on official county court paper. I read the bold black text at the top of the first page, and my blood ran completely cold. It was an emergency temporary restraining order. The petitioner listed on the document was my sister Brittany. I leaned against the marble counter and forced myself to read through the sworn affidavit she had submitted to the judge. The sheer volume of lies was absolutely staggering. Brittany claimed that I had shown up at her apartment in a violent rage. She wrote that I had shoved her down a flight of stairs and threatened to ruin her life out of pure malicious jealousy. She claimed she was terrified for her physical safety and the safety of her husband Jason. I flipped to the second page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Patricia had actually signed a supporting witness statement under penalty of perjury. My mother had officially corroborated the entire fabricated story, wiping away fake tears in front of a judge to validate my sister's lies. They had painted a picture of me as a violent, unstable aggressor who posed an immediate threat to their physical well-being. But it was the third page of the document that revealed the true malicious brilliance of their desperate plan. The judge had granted the emergency temporary restraining order pending a formal preliminary hearing. That hearing was scheduled for this coming Friday. In the meantime, the order came with strict mandatory conditions. The bold text clearly stated that as the respondent, I was temporarily flagged in the state legal system. I was strictly prohibited from leaving the jurisdiction of Illinois. If I attempted to clear international customs at the airport, my passport would be flagged, and I would be detained for violating an active court order. I let out a sharp breath, setting the papers down on the counter. My family did not actually care about getting a restraining order against me. They knew I was leaving the country today. They knew they had lost all access to my money. This legal maneuver was a calculated, elaborate trap. They had filed these fake charges specifically to ground me in Chicago. They wanted to hold my international relocation hostage. They were banking on the fact that I would be so terrified of missing my transfer to Geneva that I would desperately call them and offer a massive cash settlement to drop the fabricated charges. They wanted to extort the $50,000 they needed to keep Brittany out of federal prison. I placed the order beside the envelope and called Davis. He answered immediately. Davis, Brittany has obtained an emergency restraining order based on a fabricated assault allegation, I said. Patricia signed as a witness, and the order prevents me from leaving Illinois until Friday. Send me photographs of every page before you do anything else, he instructed. Do not call your family and do not post about this online. I scanned the documents with my phone while Davis opened the electronic court docket from his office. He confirmed that the order was temporary and that the judge had relied entirely on the two sworn affidavits. No police report, medical record, photograph, or independent witness statement had been attached. That is important, Davis said. An emergency judge acted on the assumption that the allegations were true because you were not present to respond. Friday is our opportunity to replace their story with verifiable records. He asked where I had been during the time Brittany claimed the assault occurred. I checked my calendar and remembered signing for a package in my building lobby before taking a video call from Geneva. Davis immediately began listing the evidence we needed. He would preserve the lobby cameras, obtain the concierge log, secure the delivery signature, and request the location records connected to my phone. He also instructed me to save every message from my family and forward the earlier threat concerning the $50,000. Then he told me to contact Marcus before rumors or automated background checks reached the company first. Transparency had protected me during the fabricated ethics complaint, and it would protect me again. Marcus answered from home. I gave him the essential facts and emailed the order while we spoke. He reviewed the travel restriction and told me not to worry about Monday's start date. The Geneva office would delay my arrival without affecting the promotion, and the company legal department would preserve my corporate access records from the relevant evening. Those records would show that I had been connected to a scheduled video conference from my condo. By the time the calls ended, the order no longer felt like an impenetrable wall. It was a claim with a hearing date, and every claim had to survive evidence. I placed the original papers in a protective folder and left my packed suitcases by the door. Over the next 5 days, Davis and I would build a precise timeline while my family prepared to repeat its story under oath. They believed the temporary order had stopped my life. In reality, it had given us a courtroom and a formal record in which their lies could finally be tested. The next 5 days passed in a state of hyper-focused preparation. I did not unpack my suitcases. I left them sitting by the front door of my empty condo as a daily reminder of exactly what I was fighting for. By the time Friday morning arrived, I was completely ready. I dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, pulled my hair back into a sleek bun, and applied minimal makeup. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, which was a polished, reliable corporate executive. I met Davis in the marble lobby of the downtown Chicago courthouse just before 9 in the morning. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried a thick leather briefcase that I knew contained the absolute destruction of my family. "Are you ready to do this?" he asked, handing me a cup of black coffee. I took a slow sip and nodded. "I have never been more ready in my entire life," I replied. We walked through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and took our seats at the defense table. A few minutes later, my family walked in, and I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Brittany looked absolutely absurd. She had clearly gone out of her way to look as disheveled and traumatized as possible. She wore an oversized baggy sweater, her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and she had completely scrubbed her face of makeup to make her skin look pale and sickly. She even walked with a slight exaggerated limp as Jason guided her to the petitioner's table. My mother and father filed in behind them, taking seats in the gallery directly behind Brittany. Patricia shot me a look of pure venomous triumph. The bailiff announced the arrival of the judge, and we all stood. Judge Harrison was an older, stern-looking woman who had clearly presided over thousands of these domestic disputes. She sat down at her elevated bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and opened the thick file folder in front of her. We are here today for a preliminary hearing regarding a temporary restraining order filed by Brittany Miller against her sister Nina. She announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room. The petitioner is requesting a permanent injunction based on allegations of physical assault and ongoing threats of violence. She looked down at Brittany. You may call your first witness to the stand. Brittany's lawyer, a cheap attorney they had probably hired with a credit card, stood up and officially called my sister to testify under oath. Brittany walked slowly to the witness stand, keeping her head bowed submissively. She placed her right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth under penalty of perjury. Watching her take that sacred oath while planning to lie through her teeth made my blood run absolutely cold. She sat down in the wooden chair and gripped the edges of the microphone. Her lawyer began with basic questions, establishing her identity and her relationship to me. Then he asked her to describe the events that allegedly took place on the previous Friday evening. Brittany took a deep, shuddering breath. She squeezed her eyes shut and forced a single tear to roll down her pale cheek. It was an Oscar-worthy performance designed entirely to manipulate the judge into seeing her as a terrified, helpless victim. Nina came to my apartment uninvited. Brittany began, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. She was furious because Jason and I had asked her for temporary financial help while I transitioned between jobs. She started screaming that we were trying to ruin her life. I asked her to leave, but she refused. She backed me into the narrow hallway near the top of the staircase. I told her she was scaring me, but she just laughed in my face. Then she lunged at me. She shoved me hard against the chest, and I fell backward down the first flight of stairs. She stood at the top looking down at me and said that if I ever asked her for money again, she would completely destroy my life. Then she just turned around and walked out, leaving me there bleeding. I sat perfectly still beside Davis, keeping my facial expression entirely neutral. I did not shake my head or roll my eyes or react with any outrage. I simply took out a yellow legal pad and a silver pen and began taking meticulous notes. I knew that the judge was watching my behavior just as closely as she was watching Brittany's testimony. Any emotional outburst from me would only validate the false narrative that I was prone to violent mood swings. Davis nudged my arm under the heavy table and offered a tiny approving nod. He wanted them to keep digging their own graves as deep as possible. Brittany continued to sob softly on the stand, dabbing her eyes with a white tissue the bailiff had handed her. She claimed she was too terrified to call the police that night because I had threatened her so intensely. After Brittany's lawyer finished his direct examination, Davis stood up. He politely declined to cross-examine her at this specific time, reserving his right to question her later. Brittany's lawyer looked surprised, but quickly moved to call his next witness. I call Patricia to the stand, he announced. My mother stood up from the wooden bench in the gallery, smoothing her expensive designer skirt. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, radiating the protective energy of a deeply concerned mother. She took the oath without a single ounce of hesitation, looking the judge directly in the eye. When she sat down, she folded her hands neatly in her lap. Her lawyer asked her to state her name and then directed her to describe her involvement in the alleged incident on Friday evening. I had driven over to Brittany's apartment to drop off some dinner. My mother began, her voice thick with fake emotion. When I arrived, I found my youngest daughter sitting at the bottom of her staircase crying hysterically. She had a terrible dark bruise forming on her arm and she was shaking uncontrollably. She told me that Nina had just been there and had pushed her down the stairs. My mother paused, pulling a lace handkerchief from her purse to dab at the corners of her completely dry eyes. I was absolutely horrified. I tried to call Nina to ask her why she would do something so vicious to her own flesh and blood, but she sent my calls straight to voicemail. She is incredibly unstable, Your Honor. She has always been fiercely jealous of Brittany, and her violent outbursts have escalated significantly over the past few months. My mother leaned forward, gripping the wooden railing of the witness stand. I am begging you to protect my daughter, she pleaded, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. Nina has a lot of money and a lot of power in her corporate job. She thinks she can bully and assault her family without facing any consequences. She was planning to flee the country to avoid taking responsibility for what she did to her sister. If you do not make this restraining order permanent, I am terrified that she will come back and finish what she started. Please keep her away from us. It was a masterful display of toxic manipulation. My mother stepped down from the witness stand and walked slowly back to her seat in the gallery. The entire courtroom felt heavy with the artificial emotion she had just poured into the room. She kept her head slightly bowed, dabbing at her face with her lace handkerchief, playing the role of the traumatized protective mother to absolute perfection. Judge Harrison watched her return to her seat with a look of profound sympathy. The judge then turned her attention to our table, and her expression instantly hardened into a mask of judicial sternness. She was looking at me exactly the way my family wanted her to look at me, as a dangerous, unpredictable threat who needed to be contained immediately. Mr. Davis, the judge said, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. Does the defense have any witnesses to call or any testimony to offer in response to these highly disturbing allegations presented today? Davis stood up from the heavy wooden table. He moved with a calm, deliberate grace that completely contrasted the frantic, hysterical energy my sister and mother had just displayed. He buttoned his charcoal suit jacket and picked up his thick leather briefcase, taking a moment to survey the room before proceeding. We do not need to call any character witnesses today, Your Honor, Davis replied, his voice projecting clear, steady confidence across the room. My client has no intention of engaging in an emotional debate regarding her family dynamic. We are here simply to address the specific facts outlined in the sworn affidavit. To do that, we only need to look at the timeline of events. He walked purposefully toward the center of the room and stood before the elevated wooden bench, projecting unwavering authority. Your Honor, for the official record, could you please confirm the exact time frame the petitioner claims this violent physical assault took place? Davis asked, maintaining utmost respect in his professional tone. Judge Harrison frowned slightly, but opened the thick file folder in front of her. She adjusted her reading glasses and scanned the document. According to the sworn affidavit signed by Brittany Miller and corroborated by Patricia, the alleged assault occurred last Friday evening, between 6:15 and 6:30. Thank you, Your Honor, Davis said. He placed his briefcase on the evidence table and unclasped the brass locks. With a smooth, practiced motion, he pulled out a thick stack of glossy, high-definition photographs and a certified flash drive. He approached the bench and handed the materials directly to the court clerk to pass up to the judge. The evidence I have just submitted contains certified time-stamped security footage and still photographs pulled directly from the lobby of my client's residential building, Davis explained, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. As the court is aware, Nina lives in a highly secure luxury high-rise condominium in downtown Chicago. The building utilizes state-of-the-art surveillance technology at all entrances. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, watching the color begin to slowly drain out of my mother's face in the gallery. Brittany shifted uncomfortably in her wooden chair at the petitioner's table, her eyes darting nervously toward her chief attorney as the truth closed in. If you look at the first series of photographs, Your Honor, you will see. My client Davis continued, gesturing toward the bench. The timestamp clearly shows Nina entering the ground floor lobby of her building at exactly 6:10 on Friday evening. The subsequent photographs show her standing at the front desk, having a prolonged conversation with the building concierge. In photograph 4, you can clearly see her signing for a package delivery. The final photograph in that sequence shows her stepping into the residential elevator. The timestamp on that final image is exactly 6:32. Judge Harrison stared intently at the glossy photographs in her hands. The deep silence in the courtroom was suddenly deafening as the undeniable reality of the situation took hold. "To be absolutely clear, Your Honor," Davis said, taking a step closer to the bench. "My client was standing in the lobby of her downtown Chicago condominium, surrounded by building staff and security cameras, at the exact minute her sister claims she was 20 miles away in the suburbs, shoving her down a flight of stairs. It is physically impossible for Nina to have committed this assault." Brittany let out a sharp, trembling gasp. Her lawyer frantically began flipping through his own copy of the affidavit, whispering urgently to her. My mother sat frozen in the gallery, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were completely white. The flawless trap they had set for me was instantly snapping shut around their own ankles. But Davis was not finished. He turned away from the bench and looked directly at Brittany. He let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment before he reached back into his briefcase, pulling out another file. When my client was served with this fraudulent restraining order, we knew immediately that these severe allegations were entirely fabricated, Davis told the court, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. So we did not just secure my client's alibi. We legally subpoenaed the cellular data records for the petitioner's mobile device to establish her true whereabouts. Brittany physically flinched in her chair. She looked like she wanted to sink into the floor and disappear completely from the glaring lights of the courthouse. Davis pulled out a second stack of documents featuring complex digital maps and data logs. He handed them to the court clerk without breaking his intense stare. "Your Honor, these documents represent the cellular tower pings for Brittany Miller's phone on the evening in question," Davis explained, methodically destroying the last remaining shreds of their story. "The data conclusively proves that the petitioner was nowhere near her own apartment staircase between 6:15 and 6:30. The geographic positioning data places her device actively moving through a high-end outdoor shopping mall 3 towns over. She was not bleeding on her floor, Your Honor. She was shopping." Judge Harrison slowly lowered the printed documents. She took off her reading glasses and set them down heavily on her desk. The sympathetic grandmotherly demeanor she had displayed just 5 minutes ago completely vanished. It was replaced by a look of sheer, terrifying judicial rage. She had been deliberately lied to inside her own courtroom. She had been blatantly manipulated into issuing an emergency legal order based on absolute fabricated nonsense. The judge fixed her dark, furious gaze directly on Brittany. The air in the room felt so thick it was incredibly hard to breathe. I kept my posture perfectly straight, watching the total annihilation of my family's credibility unfold exactly as we had meticulously planned. "Let me make sure I am fully understanding the evidence presented before me. Mr. Davis," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet and dangerously sharp. "You are submitting certified evidence that the petitioner was at a shopping mall while simultaneously claiming to be the victim of a violent home invasion. And your client was standing in front of security cameras 20 miles away during this entire fictional event." "That is correct, Your Honor," Davis replied simply. Brittany's lawyer jumped to his feet, his face slick with genuine panic. "Your Honor, my client was under immense emotional distress when she filed the paperwork." He stammered desperately, trying to salvage the unsalvageable, catastrophic legal situation. Judge Harrison raised one hand and the lawyer stopped in the middle of his sentence. "Emotional distress does not explain how a person can be in 2 locations at the same time, Counselor," she said. "It also does not explain why 2 sworn witnesses gave this court the same impossible timeline. Before I rule, I want answers under oath." Davis remained beside the evidence table. "With the court's permission, Your Honor, I would like to recall the petitioner for a limited cross-examination regarding the origin and purpose of this affidavit." Brittany's attorney objected, arguing that the hearing concerned safety rather than money. Judge Harrison overruled him. "The defense has proved that the alleged victim was shopping while the alleged attacker was inside a secured building 20 miles away. Evidence explaining why this petition was filed is relevant." Ms. Miller returned to the witness stand. Brittany moved toward the chair, but the performance had changed. The exaggerated limp was gone, and her eyes remained fixed on her attorney. She raised her hand again and swore to tell the truth. This time, the oath sounded like a warning. Davis approached with a thin folder. Brittany, you testified that Nina shoved you down a flight of stairs and left you bleeding. Is that correct? Yes, she whispered. Did you call emergency services? No. Did Jason or your mother call? No. Did you visit a hospital urgent care clinic or physician? I treated myself at home. Please identify your injuries. My back hurt. My shoulder was bruised. I had cuts on my arms. Were photographs taken or blood-stained clothing preserved? I was too traumatized. Davis removed 3 enlarged photographs. Your Honor. These images were obtained through a lawful preservation request to the shopping center's security department. They were recorded at 6:21, 6:27, and 6:43 on the evening of the alleged attack. The cellular records already place Brittany at that mall. These images show her walking normally, carrying shopping bags and using both arms without visible pain. The clerk carried the photographs to the judge. In the first, Brittany was leaving a shoe store with a large bag in her right hand. In the second, she was reaching above shoulder height for a box. In the third, she was laughing at a cosmetics counter. There was no limp, no torn clothing, no blood, and no visible injury. Judge Harrison looked at Brittany. Were these photographs taken on the evening identified in your affidavit? I do not remember. Davis placed a certified receipt beside them. At 6:34, you purchased designer shoes using a credit card in your name. The receipt includes your signature. Do you deny making that purchase? No. Then you were shopping during the precise period in which you swore Nina was attacking you. Brittany looked toward Patricia. My mother must have misunderstood the time. Do not put this on me, Patricia shouted from the gallery. Judge Harrison struck the bench with her gavel. Mrs. Miller, remain silent or the bailiff will remove you. Davis waited for quiet. Brittany, when did you first contact the police about this alleged assault? Sunday morning, nearly 2 days later. I was frightened. During those 2 days, did you send Nina any messages? No. Davis submitted another certified packet. These are carrier records associated with a prepaid number activated Saturday afternoon. That number sent 3 messages to Nina on Sunday, less than 20 minutes before this petition was filed. Investigators confirmed that the device connected to the wireless router registered to Jason Miller at your parents' residence. Jason shifted violently at the table. His attorney whispered for him to remain still. The first message stated that Nina had one final opportunity to protect the family, Davis continued. The second stated that if she transferred $50,000, the legal problem would disappear. The third warned that if she boarded her flight, the family would make certain she was detained before leaving Illinois. Were those messages sent with your knowledge? Brittany's mouth opened, but no answer emerged. The judge leaned forward. The witness will answer. I did not type them. That was not my question. Did you know about them and approve them? Brittany looked at her mother again. Patricia stared back, ordering her silently to say nothing. I want to speak with my attorney, Brittany said. The judge allowed a brief consultation. After less than a minute, the attorney stood and announced that Brittany would invoke her right against self-incrimination regarding the prepaid phone. The courtroom changed instantly. Judge Harrison leaned back, studying the family. Davis simply placed the carrier report beside the photographs. The defense respects that right, Your Honor. The court may still consider the sequence established by independent evidence. On Friday, the alleged assault was physically impossible. On Saturday, a prepaid phone was activated and used from the petitioner's household. On Sunday, that phone demanded $50,000 and threatened to block Nina's departure. Minutes later, Brittany and Patricia submitted matching statements that produced the exact travel restriction described in the threat. The opposing lawyer argued that anyone in the house could have sent the messages. Davis answered by submitting the activation receipt. The prepaid device had been purchased with Brittany's credit card at a pharmacy near her parents' home. Store security footage showed Jason buying it while Brittany stood beside him. Jason turned toward his wife. "You told me it was for privacy," he whispered loudly enough for the microphone to capture. Brittany grabbed his sleeve and hissed at him to stop. Judge Harrison fixed her gaze on Jason. "Mr. Miller, you are not currently a witness, but I strongly advise you to remain silent until you obtain independent counsel." That warning shattered the last trace of confidence at the petitioner's table. Jason pulled his arm away from Brittany. Patricia sank lower in her seat. Gregory stared toward the courtroom doors as though considering escape. Davis returned to the center of the room. "There is one final point, Your Honor. The petition claims Nina threatened Brittany for asking for money. The documented threat traveled in the opposite direction. Brittany's household demanded money from Nina and promised to weaponize the legal system if she refused. This was not a frightened victim seeking protection. It was a coordinated attempt to manufacture leverage before an international relocation." Judge Harrison looked down at the affidavit, and the evidence spread across her bench. Her earlier sympathy had vanished. In its place was the controlled anger of a judge who understood that her emergency authority had been manipulated. "Ms. Miller," the judge said, "you asked this court to restrict another citizens' movement based on a sworn account that objective records prove could not have occurred. You then invoked your right against self-incrimination when confronted with messages demanding money in exchange for making the legal problem disappear. Your mother supplied a matching statement, and your husband purchased the device used to transmit the demand. This court now has concerns extending far beyond whether a permanent restraining order should issue." Brittany began crying again, but the sound influenced no one. Her lawyer rose with both hands raised, pleading for an opportunity to clarify the record. He said his client had acted under pressure and misunderstood the legal consequences of the documents she signed. Judge Harrison stared at him without sympathy while Davis returned calmly to our table. I watched the judge organize the photographs, receipts, carrier records, and sworn statements into a single neat stack. Every lie my family had constructed was now preserved in the court's evidence file. Their plan depended on confusion, emotion, and urgency. Davis had stripped all three away, leaving only dates, transactions, and their own words. Across the aisle, Patricia whispered frantically to Gregory. Jason moved his chair away from Brittany. The family that entered as a united front was beginning to fracture under the weight of individual criminal exposure. The attorney rose again with both hands raised, searching desperately for any argument that might slow the collapse. Brittany's lawyer was still stammering desperately, trying to construct a coherent defense out of thin air, but it was completely useless. Judge Harrison brought her heavy wooden gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack that finalized the absolute destruction of their fabricated case. She formally dismissed the temporary restraining order with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. Furthermore, the judge issued a severe, uncompromising warning directly to Brittany and my mother. She stared them down from her elevated bench, explaining in excruciating detail the severe federal penalties for committing perjury in a sworn affidavit. She then ordered them to pay every single cent of my legal fees. I sat quietly beside Davis, watching the horrific realization wash over my family. They had walked into this courthouse fully believing they held my entire future hostage. Now they were walking out carrying the crushing weight of a dismissed order, massive legal debt, and a stark judicial warning that their actions bordered on criminal. Jason was staring at the floor, completely silent. Brittany had her face buried in her hands, her fake tears entirely replaced by genuine, suffocating panic. My mother looked as though she might physically be sick. Davis calmly gathered his documents and placed them back into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a satisfying click. He turned to me and offered a small professional smile. "You are legally cleared to fly to Geneva on Sunday," he whispered, his voice steady and reassuring. "The travel restriction has been officially lifted. You are completely free to go." I thanked Davis sincerely, feeling a profound sense of relief settling deep into my chest. He informed me that he needed to step over to the court clerk's office to officially file the judicial order for the legal fees. He advised me to head straight to my car and promised to call me later that afternoon to finalize the remaining details. I stood up from the heavy wooden defense table, smoothing the crisp fabric of my navy blue suit. I did not cast a single glance toward the petitioner's table as I turned and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the expansive, echoing marble hallway of the courthouse. The air out here felt distinctly different. It felt lighter, cleaner, and completely untainted by the toxic manipulation that had suffocated the room behind me. I took a deep, steadying breath, my mind already shifting toward my upcoming relocation. I needed to confirm my airport transfer for Sunday afternoon and finalize a few minor logistical details for my corporate apartment in Switzerland. I was mentally reviewing my packing checklist when I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of heels hitting the marble floor directly behind me. "Nina, wait right there!" My mother's voice echoed sharply down the long, empty corridor. I stopped walking, but I did not immediately turn around. I took one final moment to center myself, knowing exactly what was about to happen. When I finally turned to face them, I saw my mother and father marching aggressively toward me. They had left Brittany and Jason behind in the courtroom, likely because Brittany was still too hysterical to compose herself. My parents, however, were operating on pure, desperate adrenaline, stripped of their legal leverage and facing the catastrophic reality of Brittany's impending embezzlement charges. They had completely dropped the performative facade they wore in front of the judge. They were no longer the concerned, protective parents seeking judicial intervention. They were cornered animals, terrified and completely out of options. My mother reached me first, her face flushed a dark, angry red. She stopped just a few feet away, her chest heaving as she glared at me. "How could you do that to your own sister in front of a judge?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer panic. "You deliberately humiliated us in there. You sat there and watched that lawyer tear your family apart, and you did not do a single thing to stop it. We are going to be financially ruined trying to pay your legal fees." I did not say a single word in response. I simply stood there, my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely unreadable. I looked at her with the same detached clinical observation I would use when inspecting a defective shipment of inventory. My absolute silence seemed to infuriate her even more. She stepped closer, her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. "Do not just stand there staring at me like you have won," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Brittany is going to go to federal prison on Monday morning if we do not hand over that $50,000. We tried to do this the easy way, Nina. We tried to move in and help you manage your finances. We tried to get you to just write the check. But you had to be stubborn. You had to fight us every single step of the way, and now you have ruined everything." My father, who had been standing slightly behind her, suddenly pushed his way forward. His face was a mask of cold, hard desperation. He was no longer the arrogant man who had tried to shove a forged lease into my chest just a few days ago. He was a man watching his golden child's life completely disintegrate, and he was willing to do absolutely anything to stop it. He stepped directly into my personal space, towering over me, in a blatant attempt at physical intimidation. "You listen to me very carefully, young lady," my father warned, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed off the marble walls. "You think you are so incredibly smart because you bought yourself a fancy lawyer and beat this restraining order? You think you can just pack your bags, get on a plane to Europe, and leave us here to deal with the absolute disaster you created?" He leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing into dark, angry slits. "Well, you are profoundly mistaken. We know exactly what time your flight leaves on Sunday afternoon. We know you are flying out of Chicago O'Hare. You are not leaving this city, Nina. You are not getting on that plane to Switzerland, and you are not walking away from this family until you fix the massive mess you made of your sister's life. You are going to go to the bank, you are going to withdraw that $50,000, and you are going to hand it over to us before Sunday. If you try to run away to Geneva without paying us, I promise you we will be waiting for you at the airport. We will make a public scene so massive that airport security will have no choice but to intervene. We will tell them whatever we have to tell them to keep you grounded. Do you understand me? You are not escaping us." He stood there breathing heavily, entirely convinced that his aggressive threats were striking absolute terror into my heart. He genuinely believed that by threatening to ambush me at an international airport, he had finally regained the upper hand. He thought I was standing in silence because I was paralyzed by fear. But he could not have been more wrong. Behind my calm, carefully guarded expression, my mind was racing with profound, exhilarating satisfaction. They were playing my game. Sunday afternoon arrived with a clear blue sky over Chicago. I stepped out of the black town car my company had provided and walked into the bustling departure terminal of O'Hare International Airport. The massive glass building was humming with the chaotic energy of thousands of travelers rushing to their gates, pulling rolling luggage, and checking departure screens. I took a deep breath of the recycled airport air, feeling an overwhelming sense of anticipation. I was wearing a sharp beige cashmere sweater and tailored black trousers, carrying nothing but my passport, my purse, and a sleek silver aluminum carry-on briefcase. The heavy lifting was done. My primary luggage had already been shipped ahead to Geneva by my corporate relocation team. All I had to do was walk through security board my international first-class flight and completely leave my past behind. I moved smoothly through the crowded terminal, bypassing the winding lines of standard security. I headed directly toward the exclusive first-class priority lane. My silver briefcase rolled silently beside me on the polished terrazzo floor. I had specifically chosen this exact briefcase for today. It looked incredibly secure, highly suspicious, and entirely capable of holding a massive amount of cash. The combination locks gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights. I knew exactly what my family was planning, and I had tailored my appearance to play directly into their greedy, desperate hands. I wanted them to see me carrying something valuable. As I approached the velvet ropes of the priority security checkpoint, I noticed a sudden shift in the crowd ahead of me. A group of people was aggressively pushing against the flow of traffic, deliberately blocking the entrance to the priority lane. I slowed my pace, my eyes scanning the area. From behind a concrete support pillar, they stepped out into the open. My mother, Patricia, my father, Gregory, my sister, Brittany, and Jason. They had actually done it. They had followed through on their ridiculous, unhinged hallway threat. But they were not alone. Flanking my family on either side were two uniformed airport police officers looking incredibly serious. My father spotted me first. He nudged Brittany and pointed directly at me. The entire group moved forward, intercepting me just 10 feet away from the security podium. The two police officers stepped ahead of my family, holding up their hands to instruct me to stop walking. I came to a halt, letting my silver briefcase rest by my side. I did not look surprised or afraid. I simply looked at the officers, waiting for them to speak. I could hear the rolling wheels of other travelers' suitcases clattering against the floor all around us. Before the officers could even open their mouths, Brittany launched into her pre-planned performance. She let out a loud, dramatic sob that instantly drew the attention of dozens of nearby travelers. "That is her," Brittany cried out, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. "That is my sister Nina. She is the one I called you about, officers. She is a massive flight risk, and you cannot let her get on that plane. She is a common criminal." The taller of the two police officers held up a hand to calm my sister. He turned his stern professional gaze on me, his hand resting near his radio. "Mom, are you Nina Miller?" he asked, his voice projecting authority over the noisy terminal. "Yes, officer. I am Nina Miller," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm and polite. "Is there a problem here?" Brittany did not wait for the officer to explain. She pushed her way past Jason, her face twisted into a mask of manufactured panic and indignation. "She broke into my apartment yesterday while Jason and I were out," Brittany yelled, making sure her voice carried to the growing crowd of onlookers. "We had our life savings locked in a safe because we are transitioning between banks. She stole $150,000 in pure cash. She took all of it, and now she is trying to smuggle it out of the country to Switzerland. She is trying to escape federal jurisdiction and steal our future." My mother, Patricia, stepped forward, her hands clasped against her chest, playing the role of the devastated matriarch perfectly. "Officers, please, you have to stop her." My mother begged, wiping a dry eye. We tried to handle this internally as a family, but she refused to return the stolen money. She is a violent, unstable woman. She assaulted Brittany earlier this week, and now she has robbed them blind. If you let her get on that international flight, my youngest daughter will be financially ruined. Our family will be utterly destroyed by her pure selfish greed. The scene they were causing was absolutely spectacular. Travelers were stopping in their tracks, pulling out their phones to record the confrontation. The security agents at the nearby podium had paused their screening procedures to watch the drama unfold. My family was banking entirely on the power of public humiliation. They truly believed that if they caused a scene massive enough and embarrassing enough, I would crumble under the pressure. They thought I would be so terrified of missing my flight and being publicly arrested that I would desperately pull out my phone and wire them the $50,000 right there in the middle of the terminal just to make them go away. The second police officer rested his hand casually near his duty belt, observing my calm demeanor. "Mom, we received a very detailed emergency dispatch call regarding a high-dollar residential burglary," the officer said, addressing me directly. "The petitioner claims you are attempting to flee the country with the stolen currency inside that briefcase. We have been instructed to detain you for questioning and prevent you from clearing international customs until a detective can properly interview you. I need you to step out of the security line, step away from your luggage, and hand over your passport immediately. We need to secure the area and verify these very serious allegations." I looked past the serious faces of the two police officers and looked directly at my family. My father, Gregory, was standing tall, his chest puffed out with absolute arrogant victory. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, as if to say, "I warned you this would happen, and you should have listened to me." Jason was smirking, crossing his arms over his chest like a triumphant schoolyard bully who finally got his way. Brittany had stopped crying entirely now that the police were taking action. She was staring hungrily at the sleek silver aluminum briefcase resting near my feet, completely convinced that it was packed to the brim with physical cash meant for her. They thought they had finally won the war. They thought they had trapped me, perfectly blocking my exit and forcing my hand to bail them out. But they had absolutely no idea that I had been expecting this exact scenario since the moment we walked out of that courthouse on Friday morning. I did not argue with the officers. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend myself against Brittany's wild, dramatic accusations. I reached into my purse and pulled out my passport, holding it out to the nearest officer with a serene smile. I was exactly where I wanted to be, and my toxic family had just walked blindly into the ultimate inescapable trap. The moment my fingers closed around the passport, I remembered the meeting that had taken place 48 hours earlier in Davis' office. After my parents threatened to stop me at the airport, Davis had not dismissed the warning as another emotional outburst. He had closed the conference room door, placed his phone face down on the table, and asked me to repeat my father's exact words. I told him Gregory knew the airline, the departure day, and the airport. I repeated the threat that they would create a scene and tell security whatever was necessary to keep me from boarding. Davis listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened a legal pad and wrote 3 words in block letters. "False police report. They cannot legally stop you from traveling now that the order has been dismissed," he said. "But they can create enough confusion to delay you. If they accuse you of carrying stolen property, airport police will have to investigate before allowing you through security. That delay is probably the pressure point they intend to use. Then we should remove the pressure point," I replied. Davis gave me the thin, humorless smile he reserved for difficult cases. "We are going to do more than remove it. We are going to document their next crime while they believe they are committing it successfully." He called Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Unit and placed the conversation on speaker. The detective had already reviewed the forged lease, the attempted bank transfer, the corporate sabotage, and the perjured restraining order. He agreed that my father's courthouse threat created a credible expectation of another coordinated attempt at extortion. But he warned that prediction alone was not enough for arrests. "We need an overt act," Detective Miller explained. "A threat in a hallway establishes intent, But the cleanest case comes if they knowingly submit a false report or attempt to seize property after being warned it is under police control. Do not provoke them. Do not contact them. Simply follow your normal travel plan and allow them to make their own decisions. Davis leaned back in his chair. Nina believes they will focus on whatever she carries. They will, I said. My family is convinced I keep large amounts of money available because of my position. If I arrive with an expensive locked case, they will assume it contains the cash Brittany needs. Detective Miller was silent for a moment. That could work, but the case cannot contain anything that creates an actual customs problem. No currency, no restricted material, and no confidential corporate records. What should it contain, I asked. Copies of the evidence they have already generated against themselves, he replied. Certified records of the attempted wire transfer screenshots of the extortion messages, the forensic report tying Jason to the whistleblower complaint, and the court order dismissing the restraining order. My team can add the referral documents for the embezzlement investigation. If they claim the case contains stolen money and demand that officers open it, the contents will immediately contradict them. Davis tapped his pen against the table. We also need the airport officers responding to the call to remain independent. They cannot appear to be part of a staged confrontation. Agreed, the detective said. We will not instruct them how to react. If your family calls emergency dispatch, the responding officers will handle the allegation under normal procedure. I will remain nearby in plain clothes with another investigator. We will intervene only after the report is recorded and the bag is opened or if anyone attempts to obstruct the officers. The plan was clinical and simple. I would travel as scheduled. I would carry a silver aluminum briefcase containing certified evidence rather than money. I would cooperate with every lawful request. I would not accuse my family or reveal the investigation until the officers had heard their allegations in full. Detective Miller would observe from the public area and preserve the entire encounter. Davis insisted on one additional safeguard. He contacted the airline legal desk and informed them that I might be delayed by a malicious report connected to an active investigation. The airline agreed to hold my reservation and move me to the next available Geneva flight if police questioning caused me to miss boarding. My career and relocation would no longer depend on clearing security within a narrow window. Marcus provided the second safeguard. After Davis explained the plan, he authorized a flexible start date and instructed the European office to treat any travel delay as protected legal leave. The leverage my family expected to use against me disappeared before they ever reached the terminal. On Saturday morning, Detective Miller met us in a secure conference room inside the federal building. He placed a thick set of documents across the table and reviewed each section. The first folder contained the preliminary embezzlement referral from Brittany's former employer. The second documented the wire attempt against my legacy account. The third contained metadata from the false corporate complaint. The fourth preserved the threatening messages and the prepaid number connected to my family. The final section held the judge's order dismissing the fabricated restraining order. These are copies rather than original evidence, he said. If the briefcase is damaged or seized, nothing essential is lost. Every page is marked and logged. Do not remove anything before you reach the airport. He then showed me a small recording device integrated into the interior lining. It was not intended for secret surveillance inside a private place. The airport terminal was public, and the device would preserve audio of anyone standing close enough to make claims about the case's contents. My attorney would retain the recording under a documented chain of custody. I looked at the neat folders and felt something inside me settle. For years, my family had controlled every confrontation by creating chaos faster than I could respond. This time, every possible lie had a labeled section waiting for it. Davis closed the lid and rotated the combination locks. Do not make this theatrical, he warned. Your job is not to trap innocent people. Your job is to travel. If they leave you alone, you board the plane and this case remains closed. If they choose to file another false report, the consequences belong entirely to them. That distinction mattered to me. I was not manufacturing their conduct. I was removing every obstacle that had previously allowed them to escape responsibility. The decision to come to the airport would be theirs. The words they gave the police would be theirs. Any attempt to grab the briefcase would be theirs. Before we left, Detective Miller gave me one final instruction. When an officer asks for your identification, comply immediately. When they ask about the bag, say only that it belongs to you and that you consent to a lawful inspection. Do not tell your family what is inside. Their certainty about the money is part of what will establish that their report was invented before they saw the contents. I carried the silver case home and placed it beside my packed purse. For the rest of Saturday, my phone remained silent. No apology arrived, no request for a peaceful conversation. Just before midnight, an unknown number sent a single message stating that I would never make it through airport security. I forwarded the screenshot to Davis and Detective Miller without replying. Sunday morning, I dressed carefully and checked the briefcase seals. The documents were intact. The recorder was active. The airline had confirmed my reservation, and Detective Miller had sent one brief message saying his team was in position. When the black town car arrived, I left my condo without looking back. Now standing beneath the fluorescent lights of O'Hare, I watched the officers listen to the exact false accusation we had anticipated. Brittany supplied a precise, invented amount. Patricia repeated the claim that I was violent. Gregory displayed the confidence of a man certain that public pressure would force a payment. Every part of their conduct belonged to them. I extended my passport toward the officer, knowing that my flight, my employment, and my evidence were protected. I did not need to argue because the truth was already locked inside the silver case at my feet. All I had to do was cooperate and let my family finish documenting its own intentions. The fluorescent lights of O'Hare snapped back into focus as I held the passport between us and waited. The taller police officer extended his hand, holding his palm open to receive my identification. I handed over my navy blue passport without a single ounce of hesitation. He took it, flipping it open to verify my photograph against my face. While he inspected the official document, the second officer gestured toward a wide stainless steel inspection table situated just outside the primary flow of the security checkpoint. He asked me to step out of the priority boarding line and bring my luggage over to the table immediately. I nodded, complying with his instructions without complaint. I gripped the handle of my briefcase and guided it smoothly over the floor. At the inspection table, I stopped where the officer indicated and kept both hands visible above the handle. The crowd shifted behind the security boundary, leaving a narrow open space around us. My family followed, but was ordered to remain several steps back. Their attention was no longer on my face or passport. Every pair of eyes stayed fixed on the locked silver case. Gregory murmured something to Jason while Patricia edged forward as though preparing to claim the contents the moment the lid opened. Their performance was giving way to greed, and the officers were beginning to notice the change. I placed the heavy silver briefcase flat on the cold stainless steel surface of the inspection table. The metallic clunk echoed sharply over the ambient noise of the busy airport. The moment the briefcase left my hands, my mother Patricia suddenly lunged forward. She broke the invisible boundary the police officers had established and threw her entire body toward the inspection table. She reached out, grasping wildly for the silver handle of my luggage. Her face was contorted with a mixture of raw, unadulterated greed and desperate, furious panic. "That is our money!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she tried to yank the briefcase toward her. "She stole it from us. Open it right now and give it back to my daughter." The reaction from the airport police was instantaneous and extremely severe. The second officer stepped directly into her path, physically blocking her from reaching the metal table. He grabbed Patricia by the arm and pulled her backward, creating a solid physical barrier between her and my belongings. "Mom, step back right now," the officer ordered, his voice dropping to a harsh, commanding shout that silenced the murmuring crowd. "If you interfere with an active police investigation or touch this suspect's property again, I will place you in handcuffs for obstruction. Do you understand my warning?" My mother stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels slipping slightly on the slick floor. She gasped, placing a hand over her chest as if the officer had committed an act of unspeakable brutality against her. She looked at my father for support, but Gregory was staring at the armed police officer with a sudden flicker of genuine apprehension. Jason quickly stepped forward and pulled my mother back by her shoulders, guiding her to stand safely next to Brittany. "We are just trying to get our life savings back," Jason said, holding his hands up defensively to placate the angry officer. "We know for an absolute fact that the cash is inside that exact silver case. She is carrying $150,000 in stolen $100 bills. We just want what rightfully belongs to our family so we can go home." The taller officer, who was still holding my passport, turned his full attention back to me. He looked at my perfectly calm demeanor and then looked down at the locked briefcase resting on the table. "Mom, given the highly specific nature of these allegations and the fact that you are attempting to clear an international security checkpoint, I am going to have to ask you to open that piece of luggage," he said, his tone strictly professional. "We need to visually verify the internal contents before we can proceed any further with your departure." I did not argue with his legal request. I knew that refusing a physical search would only give them probable cause to detain me further, and it would play directly into the false narrative my family had so carefully constructed. I looked over at my younger sister. Brittany was standing safely behind Jason, leaning around his broad shoulder to get a clear, unobstructed view of the metal table. The fake theatrical tears she had been shedding just moments ago were completely gone. She was staring at the silver briefcase with an expression of pure, starving hunger. A deeply arrogant, triumphant smirk was spreading rapidly across her face. She was entirely convinced that she had finally successfully cornered me. She truly believed the police would open that case, find stacks of stolen currency, and arrest me on the spot. She thought she was about to get her $50,000 corporate bailout and watch me miss my international flight while facing federal felony charges. I turned my focus back to the stainless steel table. I rested my hands lightly on the top of the cool aluminum case. I could feel the intense, penetrating gaze of the police officers, the whispering travelers, and my toxic family burning into my back. I deliberately took my time, drawing out the tense moment to let their greedy anticipation build to an absolute fever pitch. I wanted them to fully taste their glorious victory before I ripped it entirely out of their mouths. I leaned forward and positioned my fingers over the dual combination locks located on the left and right sides of the heavy metal latch. The locks required a precise 3-digit code to release the internal spring mechanism. I slowly rotated the small metal dials on the left side, aligning the numbers into their perfect assigned position. The soft, mechanical clicking sound seemed incredibly loud in the tense, suffocating atmosphere of the security checkpoint. "You are finally going to pay for what you did to me, Nina," I heard Brittany hiss from a few feet away, her voice dripping with venomous, vicious satisfaction. "You really thought you could just steal my future and fly away to a luxury life in Europe? You are going to a federal prison, and I am taking my money back today." I ignored her completely. I did not even turn my head to acknowledge her pathetic, delusional gloating. I moved my hands to the right side of the briefcase and began slowly rotating the second set of combination dials. I matched the final numbers perfectly. My father let out a loud, heavy sigh of relief, clearly believing that the ordeal was over and the massive payout was finally within their desperate grasp. I felt a profound, overarching sense of closure washing over my entire body. I had spent my entire life trying to be the responsible older daughter, trying to protect them from the fallout of their own terrible choices. Today, I was finally setting down that crushing, lifelong burden. I rested my 2 thumbs on the square silver release buttons situated directly next to the combination dials. The 2 officers stepped in closer, their hands resting casually on their utility belts, preparing to secure a massive amount of stolen currency. I looked up at the taller officer and offered him a polite, warm, professional smile. I pressed down firmly on both release buttons simultaneously with a confident push. The heavy brass latches disengaged with a sharp, bright metallic snap that echoed loudly across the polished marble floor. The silver briefcase swung open, revealing the black velvet interior. The police officer leaned forward, expecting to see stacks of stolen cash. Instead, he stared at manila folders bearing the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There was 0 cash inside. Brittany pushed past Jason, her eyes wide. But seeing the legal documents, her triumphant smirk instantly dissolved into profound confusion. "What is this?" Brittany demanded, her voice panicked. "Where is the money, Nina?" I kept my eyes locked on the police officers. "Officers, these documents are signed federal warrants and a finalized financial dossier," I explained, my voice carrying clearly. 3 days ago, I met with the Financial Crimes Unit. I handed over proof that my sister Brittany embezzled $150,000 from her employer. My father took a step backward, his face draining of color. Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as the reality began to set in. "You see, officers," I continued, "my family knew I was leaving today. They filed a false police report claiming I robbed them to trap me and extort $50,000 to pay back a fraction of what Brittany stole. They weaponized law enforcement for a federal extortion scheme." The taller officer stared at me, processing my words. A man in a dark suit stepped out from the crowd of onlookers. He flipped open a leather wallet displaying a gold badge. "I am Detective Miller with the Financial Crimes Unit," the man announced, projecting his voice. "Ms. Miller has been cooperating with our embezzlement investigation. We knew your family was going to intercept her today. By submitting a fabricated police report to extort a witness and cover up a felony, you escalated a state-level crime to a massive federal offense." The atmosphere shifted to sheer terror. Detective Miller gestured, and the airport police officers immediately unclipped the metal handcuffs from their belts. Jason threw his hands up, backing away from Brittany as fast as he could. He did not hesitate before throwing his wife entirely under the bus. "I had no idea about any stolen money," Jason screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "I swear, officers, I am innocent. She told me to come to the airport to stop Nina. I did not know she was a thief. Do not arrest me." Brittany spun around to face her husband, her face twisting in pure betrayal. She opened her mouth to scream, but the police officer was already grabbing her wrists and pulling them behind her back. The metallic clicking of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the terminal. Brittany collapsed into genuine hysterical sobbing. These were the desperate, terrified tears of a golden child finally facing devastating consequences. Patricia lunged forward, trying to grab Brittany's arm, but the second police officer intercepted her. Patricia and Gregory were swiftly detained, pushed against the concrete pillar, and placed in handcuffs for aiding and abetting and filing a false police report. My father looked completely broken, his arrogant pride entirely shattered as the officers loudly read them their Miranda rights. He looked at me, his eyes begging for me to intervene. I simply looked away. I reached out and gently closed the lid of my silver briefcase. The brass latches clicked shut with a soft, satisfying sound. The taller officer stepped back and politely handed me my passport. "You are completely cleared to fly, Ms. Miller," the officer said, offering a respectful nod. "Thank you, officer," I replied, slipping the passport into my purse. I gripped the handle of my briefcase and turned away from my family. Brittany was wailing, begging my mother to do something. Patricia was sobbing hysterically while my father stood in stunned defeat. I walked directly through the first-class security checkpoint. I did not look back over my shoulder a single time. I let the sound of their screaming fade away as I stepped onto the escalator that would take me to my departure gate and my absolute freedom. 4 months later, I sat in my spacious corner office in Geneva, Switzerland. The massive windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the snow-capped Swiss Alps and the pristine blue waters of the lake below. I took a slow sip of my hot espresso, savoring the profound quiet of my new life. My computer monitor chimed, signaling an incoming message. I clicked open my secure email inbox and found an update from my attorney, Davis. I scanned the concise paragraphs with a mild, detached interest. The federal judge had not shown Brittany a single ounce of leniency. She was currently serving a lengthy sentence in a federal correctional facility for corporate embezzlement and extortion. Jason had filed for divorce the moment she was incarcerated, attempting to distance himself from the massive financial restitution. My parents, Patricia and Gregory, had completely drained their retirement accounts and mortgaged their suburban house to pay for Brittany's criminal defense attorneys. They lost the trial and their home was currently in foreclosure. They were entirely bankrupt, socially exiled, and living in a cheap, cramped apartment. I read the final sentence of the email, noting that my parents had attempted to ask Davis for my international phone number. They were hoping I would send them money to help cover their basic living expenses. I did not feel a single pang of guilt or sadness. I felt absolutely nothing for them. They had built their entire lives on manipulation and greed, and they had finally been crushed under the weight of their own toxic choices. I permanently deleted the email from my secure inbox. I turned my phone on silent and leaned back in my chair. The greatest revenge I could have ever achieved was not just putting them behind bars. It was building this beautiful, wealthy, and peaceful life completely out of their reach. I smiled at the majestic mountains outside my window, taking one more long sip of my dark espresso, and got back to my incredibly fulfilling work. As I sit in my new office looking out over the beautiful Swiss Alps, I realized that the greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that your worth is not defined by your family's ability to value you. For years, I thought that if I just worked hard enough or accommodated them enough, I would finally earn their respect. But toxic people do not respect accommodation. They only see it as an opportunity for exploitation. They will use the concept of family loyalty as a weapon to drain your resources and sabotage your success. I had to learn the hard way that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. When people show you that they are willing to destroy your life to save themselves, you must believe them and act accordingly. My parents and my sister thought they could use guilt to trap me, but their greed became their own undoing. True security comes from building your own independence and refusing to let anyone manipulate your future. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is pack your bags, stand your ground, and walk away without a single ounce of guilt. If you are watching this and dealing with a family that treats you like a financial safety net rather than a human being, please know that you have the power to walk away. You deserve to build a life that is entirely your own. Please share your story in the comments below if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your future. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories about resilience and reclaiming your power. Thank you for listening.